The parched summer heat shimmered across Willow Sullivan's tear-streaked face as she stood trembling on the auction block. Her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin, another piece of property being sold to settle her husband's mounting debts in Eldorado Canyon, Nevada Territory. 1867. $5 for the woman, called a slurred voice from the crowd of rough-faced men. Hank Sullivan, her husband of 3 years, swayed drunkenly beside the auctioneer, clutching a half-empty bottle of whiskey while avoiding her desperate gaze. $15, another voice hollered, followed by crude laughter and obscene suggestions that made Willow's stomach turn. The auctioneer, a balding man with nicotine-stained fingers, grinned wickedly. "Now, gentlemen, Mrs. Sullivan here is a fine specimen. Young, strong, can cook and clean. Hank here assures me she's worth every penny." Willow fought back a sob, remembering the shy, earnest young miner who had courted her with wildflowers and promises of a good life in the silver-boom towns of Nevada. 3 years of marriage had transformed him into the hollow-eyed drunk who now traded her for liquor money without a flicker of remorse in his bloodshot eyes. $25, called a gruff voice from the back. Willow squinted against the sun to see a tall figure pushing through the crowd. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard country, his face shadowed beneath a dust-covered Stetson. When he reached the front, Willow saw a man perhaps 5 years her senior, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. $50, the stranger announced, his voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. Hank Sullivan's head jerked up, his bloodshot eyes widening at the unexpected sum enough to keep him in whiskey for months. "Do I hear 60? The auctioneer asked hopefully, looking around the assembled men. No one spoke. Most of the miners and drifters who'd gathered for the spectacle hadn't intended to actually bid more than a few dollars for the amusement. Going once. The auctioneer called. The stranger's gaze locked with Willow's, and she saw something unexpected there, not the lascivious intent she'd seen in the other bidders, but something she couldn't quite name, going twice. Hank stepped forward unsteadily. "Sold to the gentleman in the back." The stranger approached the platform, reaching into his vest to withdraw a leather pouch. He counted out the money deliberately, handing it to the auctioneer who passed it to Hank. Willow watched as her husband's fingers closed greedily around the bills, not even looking at her as he turned toward the saloon. The stranger climbed the steps of the platform, his spurs jingling softly. Without a word, he drew a knife from his belt. Willow flinched, but he simply cut the ropes binding her wrists. "My name is Hayes Remington," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "And you're not anyone's property to be sold, madam." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the anticlimactic end to their afternoon's entertainment. Hayes took her gently by the elbow, leading her down the steps. "What happens now?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper, rubbing her chafed wrists. "What do you expect of me?" Hayes glanced toward the saloon where Hank had disappeared, his expression hardening. "First, we're going to have a word with your husband." Willow felt a surge of panic. "Please, I don't want any trouble. He gets violent when he's been drinking." "No trouble," Hayes assured her, just setting things straight. They found Hank at the bar of the Golden Nugget Saloon, already ordering whiskey with his newfound wealth. Hayes approached him calmly, while Willow hung back near the swinging doors, heart pounding. "Sullivan," Hayes called. Hank turned, his face darkening when he saw Willow. "What do you want?" "I sold her fair and square. That's what I'd like to discuss." Hayes's voice remained level. "You can't sell what isn't property, Sullivan," Hank sneered, emboldened by the whiskey he'd already consumed. "She's my wife. Law says what's hers is mine, not anymore." Hayes set a document on the counter. "Sign this." "What is it?" Hank squinted at the paper. "Divorce papers. Already drawn up by Judge Holloway this morning when I heard what you were planning." Willow gasped softly. How had this stranger known about the auction before it happened? Hank laughed. "And why would I do that?" Hayes leaned closer. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure every man in this territory knows you sold your wife for whiskey money. Even in Eldorado Canyon, that's considered low. You won't be welcome in any mining camp from here to California." "You threatening me, mister?" Hank's hand drifted toward his hip, though Willow knew he didn't carry a gun. No threat, just a promise. Hayes pushed a pencil toward him. "Sign and we all walk away." The saloon had fallen silent, every eye on them. Hank glanced around, sensing the judgment in the gazes of even the roughest men present. With a curse, he scrawled his name on the paper. Hayes nodded, folding the document and tucking it into his vest. Then, in a swift movement that took everyone by surprise, he grabbed the bottle of whiskey Hank had just purchased. Before anyone could react, Hayes walked to the batwing doors and emptied the bottle onto the dusty street. "That's $50 worth of whiskey." Hank shouted, rising from his stool. "Consider it the price of the lesson," Hayes replied, setting the empty bottle on a nearby table. "Don't ever treat a woman like property again." He returned to Willow, who stood frozen in disbelief. "You're free now, Mrs. Sullivan. Or whatever name you'd prefer to use." "It's Willow," she managed, her voice trembling. "Willow Shepherd was my maiden name," Hayes nodded. "Miss Shepherd, then. You're welcome to stay at my sister's boarding house until you decide what you want to do next. No obligations, no strings attached." Willow searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was simply a different kind of trap. Finding none, she asked the question burning in her mind. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Hayes looked back at Hank, who had slumped back onto his bar stool, defeated and humiliated. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people get caught in bad situations. Sometimes they just need a chance to start over." He offered his arm. "Shall we go?" Hesitantly, Willow placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his sleeve. As they stepped out into the harsh sunlight of Eldorado Canyon, she realized she was walking into an unknown future, frightening, but somehow less terrifying than the life she was leaving behind. The boarding house, owned by Hayes's sister, stood on the eastern edge of town. A two-story white clapboard building with green shutters, and a well-tended garden, a stark contrast to the rough-hewn saloons and ramshackle miners' cabins that comprised most of Eldorado Canyon. "Martha runs the cleanest establishment in 3 counties, Hayes explained as they approached. "She won't ask questions you don't want to answer." As if summoned by her name, the door swung open, and a woman with Hayes's same storm blue eyes appeared on the porch. She was older, perhaps in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Hayes Remington, you've been gone all morning," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gaze shifted to Willow and her expression softened. "And who might this be?" "Martha, this is Miss Willow Shepherd. She needs a place to stay for a while." Understanding passed between the siblings. Martha nodded once. "Well, you've come to the right place, Miss Shepherd. I've got a vacant room with a lovely view of the sunrise." "Come inside. You look like you could use some tea and perhaps a cool cloth for your face." Willow realized her cheeks were still streaked with dried tears and dust. She glanced at Hayes, uncertain. "Go on," he encouraged. "Martha will take good care of you. You're not coming in." Willow asked, surprised by her own disappointment. "I have some business to attend to," he replied. "But I'll return this evening to make sure you're settling in." Martha linked her arm through Willow's. "Come along, dear, let's get you comfortable." Willow allowed herself to be led inside, glancing back once to see Hayes watching them, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Then he turned and walked back toward town, his tall figure soon disappearing around a bend in the road. Inside, the boarding house was cool and smelled of fresh bread and lavender. Martha showed Willow to a small but tidy room on the second floor, furnished with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and a washstand. "The bathing room is at the end of the hall," Martha explained. "I'll have hot water brought up if you'd like to wash away the day's troubles." "That's very kind," Willow said, overwhelmed by the woman's generosity, "but I'm afraid I have no money to pay you." Martha waved a dismissive hand. "Any friend of Hayes is welcome here." We can discuss arrangements later if you decide to stay on. She hesitated, studying Willow's face. My brother didn't explain much, but I can guess at your circumstances. You're safe here, Miss Shepherd. Willow's composure finally broke. She sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Martha sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her back. There now, she soothed. Whatever happened before, you've got a chance to start fresh. That's what Eldorado Canyon is good for, despite its rough edges, new beginnings. When Willow had calmed, Martha left her to rest, promising to return with tea and a light supper later. Alone for the first time in what felt like ages, Willow crossed to the small window. From here, she could see the rugged mountains that surrounded the canyon, painted gold and crimson by the late afternoon sun. How strange that this morning she had awakened as Willow Sullivan, a desperate woman with no hope, and now she sat in this clean, peaceful room, free of the man who had become her tormentor. All because a stranger had decided to intervene. Hayes Remington. The name rolled through her mind as she tried to understand his motives. Men, in her experience, rarely did anything without expecting something in return. Yet he had given her freedom and asked for nothing. Willow stretched out on the bed, her body aching from the tension of the day. Despite her confusion and the lingering fear that this reprieve might be temporary, exhaustion pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awakened to a gentle knock on her door and Martha's voice announcing supper. Disoriented, Willow sat up, surprised to find the room bathed in lamplight. She had slept for hours. When she opened the door, Martha handed her a tray with a bowl of fragrant stew, a slice of fresh bread, and a cup of tea. Eat, then come downstairs if you feel up to it. Hayes has returned. Willow's heart quickened. She ate quickly, then splashed water on her face and attempted to smooth her unruly auburn hair before descending the stairs. She found Martha and Hayes sitting at a round table in a small private parlor off the main dining room. Hayes rose when she entered, gesturing to an empty chair. Miss Shepherd, I trust you were able to rest. Yes, thank you. Willow sat, acutely aware of her wrinkled dress and disheveled appearance. Mr. Remington, I don't know how to properly thank you for what you did today. Hayes shook his head. No thanks necessary. But there is, she insisted. You spent a considerable sum and risked confrontation with Hank for a stranger. Hayes has a habit of involving himself in other people's troubles, Martha said with an affectionate smile at her brother. Only when necessary, he replied, then turned his attention back to Willow. I've brought something that belongs to you. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book and a gold locket. Willow gasped, reaching for them with trembling hands. My mother's Bible and locket. How did you get these? Let's just say Mr. Sullivan was persuaded to return them, Hayes said, a hint of steel beneath his mild tone. Willow clutched the precious items to her chest. The Bible contained her family history, names and dates going back 3 generations. The locket held miniature portraits of her parents, both long deceased. They were the only links to her past that she had managed to keep hidden from Hank's pawning habits. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, Hayes assured her. But there is something we should discuss. Your situation, Martha rose. I'll leave you two to talk. I have guests to attend to. She squeezed Willow's shoulder as she passed. Remember what I said about new beginnings. When they were alone, Hayes leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Shepherd, I want to be clear that you're under no obligation to me. The money I paid today wasn't for you, it was to teach Sullivan a lesson and to secure your freedom. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. Willow studied him, trying to understand this unusual man. What choices does a woman alone have in a place like Eldorado Canyon? More than you might think, Hayes replied. Martha could use help with the boarding house. The school teacher is looking for an assistant. Or if you wish to leave the canyon entirely, I could arrange safe passage to Carson City or even San Francisco. Why are you doing this? Willow asked again, needing to understand. Hayes was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reluctant. 3 years ago, my younger sister Caroline was in a situation not unlike yours. Her husband was a gambler and a drunk. Hayes's jaw tightened. He mistreated her badly. By the time I found out and came to help, it was too late. She died of injuries he inflicted. Willow's hand flew to her mouth. I'm so sorry. When I heard about Sullivan's plan to sell you, I couldn't stand by and let another woman suffer if I could prevent it. He met her gaze directly. I couldn't save Caroline, but I could help you. The raw pain in his eyes made Willow's heart ache. She reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. You did. You saved me today. A small smile softened his features. Then it was worth every dollar. They talked well into the evening, the formality between them gradually easing. Hayes told her about his ranch 15 miles outside town, where he raised horses. Martha returned occasionally to refill their teacups, clearly pleased by their conversation. When Willow finally retired to her room, her mind was filled with Hayes Remington, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, and the pain he carried from his sister's fate. For the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking not of fear and survival, but of possibilities. The next morning, Willow awakened to sunlight streaming through her window. For a disorienting moment, she expected to hear Hank's angry voice demanding breakfast, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was free. After dressing in her only other dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been her Sunday best, she made her way downstairs to find Martha in the kitchen, kneading dough. Good morning, Martha greeted her cheerfully. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in years, Willow admitted. Please let me help with something to earn my keep. Martha sized her up with an appraising eye. Can you cook? Yes, quite well, and I can clean and keep accounts. Accounts, you say? Martha looked intrigued. Now that's a useful skill. My boarding house has grown faster than my ability to manage the books. Over a breakfast of cornbread and coffee, they discussed an arrangement. Willow would help with cooking, cleaning, and bookkeeping in exchange for room and board, plus a small salary once the boarding house started showing better profits. It's not much, Martha cautioned, but it's honest work and you'll have independence. It's perfect, Willow assured her, grateful beyond words. They spent the morning going over the ledgers, with Willow quickly identifying several areas where costs could be reduced. By lunchtime, they had worked out a new system that would make the boarding house's operations more efficient. My brother was right about you, Martha commented as they prepared lunch for the boarders. You're remarkably capable for someone who's been through so much. Willow blushed at the compliment. Speaking of your brother, will he be coming by today? A knowing smile crossed Martha's face. He mentioned stopping by this afternoon. I believe he's bringing some things for you. True to Martha's word, Hayes arrived shortly after the midday meal, leading a packhorse laden with parcels. When Willow came out to the porch, he tipped his hat to her. Miss Shepherd, you're looking well today. Thank you for saying so, though I know I must look a fright in this old dress. She gestured self-consciously at her worn attire. Actually, that's part of why I'm here. Hayes began untying bundles from the packhorse. I took the liberty of asking Mrs. Henderson at the general store to put together some necessities for you. Martha provided the measurements. Willow watched in astonishment as he carried several packages into the house. Inside, he set them on a table in the parlor. Mr. Remington, this is too much. I can't accept. You can and you will, he interrupted gently. Consider it an investment in your new position here. Martha tells me you've already reorganized her chaotic bookkeeping system. Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. He's right, Willow. And I insist you accept. A proper boarding house manager needs to look the part. Outnumbered, Willow reluctantly opened the packages to find 2 practical day dresses. A Sunday dress of deep green that would complement her auburn hair, undergarments, stockings, a nightgown, and even a pair of sturdy leather boots. There's one more thing, Hayes said, handing her a small velvet pouch. Inside, she found a silver hair comb inlaid with mother-of-pearl. It wasn't an expensive piece, but it was pretty and feminine, something chosen with care. It reminded me of the wildflowers that grow up in the high country, Hayes explained, a faint flush rising on his tanned cheeks. Delicate but strong enough to withstand the mountain winds. Something warm unfurled in Willow's chest at his words. "It's beautiful, thank you." Their eyes met, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Then Martha cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Hayes, will you stay for supper? I'm making my famous venison stew." He reluctantly pulled his gaze from Willow's. "I can't tonight. I've got a new stallion that needs breaking, and I should get back before dark." To Willow, he added, "But I'll be in town for the Founders' Day celebration this Saturday. Perhaps you'd consider accompanying me." The invitation took her by surprise. Yes, I'd like that." His smile transformed his serious face. "Until Saturday, then." After he left, Martha helped Willow try on her new clothes. The dresses needed only minor alterations, which they set about making immediately. "My brother has good taste," Martha commented as she pinned the hem of the green dress. "This color suits you perfectly." Willow smoothed the soft fabric, wondering at how quickly her circumstances had changed. "Martha, I'm afraid I don't understand what's happening. Why is Hayes being so generous to me?" Martha sat back on her heels, considering her words carefully. "After Caroline died, something in Hayes changed. He became obsessed almost with protecting women from abusive situations. He's helped several leave bad marriages, find work, start new lives." She paused. "But I've never seen him quite like this before." "Like what?" "Invested, personal." Martha smiled knowingly. "He's never brought gifts before or invited any of the others to town celebrations." Willow felt her cheeks warm. "Surely he's just being kind." "Hayes is always kind, but there's kindness and then there's interest." Martha stood, brushing off her skirt. "I think my brother is quite taken with you," Willow shepherded. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a blur of activity. Willow threw herself into her new duties, eager to prove her worth. She reorganized the kitchen storage, deep-cleaned the guest rooms, and balanced the accounts with meticulous care. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted but satisfied, a new and welcome feeling. Eldorado Canyon was beginning to bustle with preparations for the Founders' Day celebration. Banners were strung across Main Street, and temporary stalls appeared for the merchants who would sell their wares. According to Martha, the annual event commemorated the discovery of silver in the canyon 15 years earlier and drew people from neighboring settlements for a day of festivities. On Saturday morning, Willow took extra care with her appearance. She bathed in the copper tub, washing her hair with the lavender soap Martha had provided. After drying her auburn tresses by the window, she pinned them up in a neat arrangement, using the silver comb Hayes had given her to secure a few tendrils at her temple. The green dress fit perfectly after their alterations, emphasizing her slender waist and bringing out the flecks of emerald in her hazel eyes. As she studied her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser, Willow hardly recognized herself. The fearful, downtrodden woman who had stood on the auction block was gone, replaced by someone who looked almost hopeful. A knock at the front door sent a flutter of anticipation through her stomach. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she descended the stairs to find Hayes in the foyer, hat in hand, dressed in a clean white shirt, black vest, and dark trousers. His usual trail dust was nowhere to be seen, and his dark hair was neatly combed. When he saw her, a look of genuine appreciation crossed his face. "Miss Shepherd, you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Remington, so do you." She blushed at her own boldness. "That is, you look very handsome." Martha appeared from the kitchen, beaming at them both. "Don't you make a fine pair?" "Now off with you, the festivities are already starting. And Hayes, mind you have her back at a reasonable hour." "Yes, madam," he replied with mock solemnity, offering Willow his arm. "Shall we?" As they walked toward town, Willow was acutely aware of the curious glances they received. Word had spread quickly about the auction and Hayes's intervention. Some looks were sympathetic, others judgmental, but Hayes seemed oblivious to them all, focusing his attention entirely on her. "I hope you don't mind being the subject of gossip," he said, correctly interpreting her discomfort. Small towns run on talk, but they also have short memories. Some new scandal will replace ours soon enough. "Ours?" she echoed, surprised by his choice of words. He smiled down at her. "Well, they're certainly talking about both of us." The reclusive rancher, and the woman he rescued, it's the most excitement Eldorado Canyon has seen since old Jeremiah Cox struck a silver vein last winter. His easy manner helped Willow relax. By the time they reached the town square, she was laughing at his descriptions of previous Founders' Day disasters, including the year someone's prize pig got loose and disrupted the mayor's speech by charging the platform. The celebration was in full swing, with fiddle music filling the air and children darting between the stalls of food and crafts. Hayes purchased lemonade for them both, then led her through the crowds, introducing her to people he knew. To Willow's surprise, most were welcoming, especially when Hayes made it clear she was under his protection. They watched a horse race, applauded the schoolchildren's recitation of the town's history, and admired the quilts on display from the ladies' sewing circle. When the dancing began, Hayes turned to her with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance, Miss Shepherd?" Willow hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," he confessed. "We can be terrible at it together." The simple honesty of his words made her laugh, and she allowed him to lead her to the area that had been cleared for dancing. The fiddlers struck up a lively tune, and Hayes placed one hand respectfully at her waist, taking her other hand in his. They were, indeed, somewhat awkward at first, stepping on each other's toes and laughing at their mistakes. But gradually they found their rhythm, turning and spinning with the music. Willow felt lighter than she had in years, almost as if she could float away if Hayes's strong hands weren't anchoring her to earth. As the afternoon wore on, they took a break from the festivities, finding a quiet spot under a cottonwood tree at the edge of town. Hayes spread his coat on the ground for her to sit on, then settled beside her. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. "More than I can say," Willow replied truthfully. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply have fun." Hayes studied her face, his expression serious. "Willow, may I call you Willow?" She nodded, her pulse quickening at the sound of her name on his lips. "Willow, I want you to know that I meant what I said about your freedom being yours to use as you choose. If working at Martha's makes you happy, I'm glad. If someday you want to move on to other opportunities, I'll support that too." "Why does my happiness matter so much to you?" she asked softly. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, watching the dancers in the distance. "When I found Caroline after her husband after she died, I made a promise. I promised her I'd never stand by and let someone else suffer if I could prevent it." He turned to look at Willow directly. "But with you, it's become something more than just keeping that promise." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I find myself thinking about you when you're not around. Wondering if you're safe, if you're happy." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "I know it's too soon. You've only just escaped a terrible situation, and the last thing you need is another man making claims on your time or attention." Willow felt a surge of warmth at his consideration. "Hayes, you are nothing like Hank, nothing. Even so," he insisted, "you deserve time to find your footing, to decide what you want without pressure from anyone, including me." She reached out hesitantly, placing her hand over his. "What if what I want is to know you better?" The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I would be honored, Miss Willow Shepherd." As the sun began to sink toward the western ridges, painting the canyon in gold and rose, they rejoined the celebration. The town had arranged for fireworks, a rare treat in the frontier, and everyone gathered to watch as the first rockets streaked into the darkening sky. Standing beside Hayes in the cooling evening air, watching the brilliant bursts of color overhead, Willow felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. Not just for survival, but for joy, for connection, for a future bright with possibilities instead of shadowed by fear. When Hayes walked her back to the boarding house later that night, they lingered on the porch, reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for today," Willow said. "It was perfect." "The pleasure was mine," Hayes replied, his voice low and warm in the darkness. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand, pressing his lips gently to her knuckles in a gesture both respectful and intimate. "Good night, Willow, sweet dreams." "Good night, Hayes," she whispered, watching him walk down the path until his figure disappeared into the night. Inside, she touched the back of her hand where his lips had been, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Willow Shepherd was looking forward to tomorrow. The weeks following Founder's Day established a new rhythm to Willow's life. She settled into her role at the boarding house, quickly becoming indispensable to Martha with her efficient management and warm way with guests. Word spread about the quality of meals and cleanliness at the Remington boarding house, and soon they had a waiting list for rooms. Hayes visited regularly, usually bringing small gifts, fresh wildflowers, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, honey from the hives of a farmer whose wife he'd helped last winter. Each gesture spoke of thoughtfulness rather than extravagance, as if he understood that what Willow valued most was consideration, not costly trinkets. Sometimes they would simply sit on the boarding house porch in the evening, talking as the stars emerged above the canyon walls. Hayes told her about his ranch, the horses he bred and trained, his dreams of expanding his operations. Willow shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with her parents who had both succumbed to fever within a year of reaching Nevada territory, leaving her alone at 19. "That's when I met Hank," she explained one evening as they watched lightning flicker in distant clouds. "He was kind at first, or at least he seemed to be. Attentive. He made me feel safe when I was terrified of being alone in this wild country." Hayes listened without interrupting, his face shadowed in the gathering dusk. "The drinking started about 6 months after we married," she continued. "At first just on weekends, then every night, then all day." She sighed, the memories still painful despite the distance she'd gained. "When he lost his job at the mine, he started selling our things for whiskey money. I tried to hide the few valuables I had left, my mother's locket, my Bible, but he found them eventually. He was going to sell them the day after he sold me." Hayes's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." "I'm not," Willow said, surprising herself with the realization. "Not anymore. If things had been different, I wouldn't be here now, with you." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Then I suppose we both have something to be grateful for." As summer gave way to autumn, their relationship deepened. Hayes began taking Willow to his ranch on Sundays after church, teaching her to ride one of his gentlest mares. She delighted in the freedom of galloping across the open grasslands that spread beyond the canyon, the wind in her hair and Hayes riding beside her. The ranch itself was modest, but well kept, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses of exceptional quality. Inside, the house was simply furnished but comfortable, with bookcases full of volumes on horse breeding, Western exploration, and surprisingly, poetry. "My mother's influence," Hayes explained when he caught Willow examining his collection. "She believed a man should cultivate his mind as carefully as his land. She sounds like a wise woman. She would have liked you very much." The way he said it, with quiet certainty, made Willow's heart flutter. One crisp October afternoon, Hayes suggested a picnic in a meadow near a small creek that ran through his property. The aspens were turning gold, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight, and the air held the first hint of winter's approach. After spreading a blanket beneath a cottonwood, Hayes produced a basket filled with cold chicken, biscuits, and Martha's apple preserves. They ate companionably, watching a pair of hawks circle lazily overhead. "I've been thinking," Hayes said eventually, setting aside his plate. About the future. Willow's pulse quickened. Oh, winter will be here before we know it. The passes get difficult, sometimes impassable. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. I've been meaning to ask you. That is, I've been hoping. A sudden commotion from the direction of the ranch house interrupted him. They both turned to see one of Hayes's ranch hands galloping toward them, waving urgently. "Mr. Remington," the young man called as he approached. "Trouble in town. Sheriff sent me to fetch you." Hayes was on his feet instantly. "What kind of trouble, Jimmy?" "It's Sullivan, sir. He's back and he's looking for his wife. Says she was stolen from him. He's at the saloon making threats, waving a gun around. Sheriff thought you should know." Willow felt the blood drain from her face. "Hank, here." Her moment of perfect happiness shattered like glass. Hayes turned to her, his expression grim. "Willow, I want you to stay here with Jimmy. I'll go deal with Sullivan." "No," she said, standing on shaky legs. "No, I have to come with you. This is my problem." "It's our problem," Hayes corrected firmly, "but Sullivan is drunk and armed." "I won't put you in danger. If I stay here, I'll only worry more." She met his gaze steadily, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. "Besides, sooner or later I'll have to face him. Better with you beside me than alone." Hayes studied her face for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you stay behind me, and if things get ugly, you promise to get clear." "I promise." The ride back to Eldorado Canyon was tense and silent. As they approached town, Willow could see a crowd gathered outside the Broken Spoke Saloon. Sheriff Miller stood on the boardwalk, his hand resting on his holster, addressing someone inside. Hayes helped Willow dismount a safe distance away. "Stay here until I call for you," he instructed, his voice leaving no room for argument. She nodded, watching anxiously as he approached the sheriff. The two men conferred briefly, then Hayes stepped onto the boardwalk. From her position, Willow could just make out Hank's voice, slurred but loud, coming from inside. "I want my property back. That cowboy stole my wife." "She's not property, Sullivan," Hayes replied, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "And she's not your wife anymore. Judge Holloway signed the divorce papers months ago." "Papers don't mean nothing," Hank shouted. "She belongs to me." "No, she doesn't," Hayes said calmly. "She belongs to herself." There was a commotion inside, and suddenly Hank lurched onto the boardwalk, a pistol clutched in his trembling hand. Willow gasped at the sight of him. 3 months had ravaged what the whiskey hadn't already destroyed. He was gaunt, his clothes filthy, his face a map of broken veins and festering sores. "You," he snarled when he saw Hayes. "You turned her against me?" "She made her own choice," Hayes replied, not backing down despite the gun pointed at his chest. "Put the weapon down, Sullivan, before you add murder to your sins." Hank's bloodshot eyes swept the crowd until they found Willow. A terrible smile twisted his features. "There she is. Come here, wife." Willow stood frozen, terror and revulsion battling within her. Then, drawing a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I'm not your wife anymore, Hank." "The hell you ain't," he gestured wildly with the gun. "I paid good money for you, nursed you when your folks died, gave you a roof." "And then you sold me like cattle," Willow replied, finding strength in speaking the truth aloud. "You chose whiskey over me, Hank. You made your choice and I've made mine." Hank's face contorted with rage. He swung the gun toward her. "If I can't have you, then nobody." The shot rang out before he could finish. For a terrible moment, Willow thought she'd been hit. Then Hank crumpled to his knees, the gun falling from his grasp. Behind him stood Sheriff Miller, his smoking revolver still raised. "I warned you not to point that gun at anyone, Sullivan," the sheriff said grimly. Willow rushed forward as Hank collapsed onto the boardwalk. Despite everything, she couldn't watch him die without offering some comfort. She knelt beside him, aware of Hayes moving protectively close. "Willow," Hank gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't mean, the whiskey made me." "I know, Hank," she said softly, taking his hand. Whatever anger she had harbored was useless now in the face of death. "I forgive you." A look of surprise, then profound relief crossed his face. He tried to speak again but couldn't find the breath. A moment later, he was gone. Willow felt Hayes's strong hands on her shoulders, gently helping her to her feet. The crowd had fallen silent, witnesses to both a tragedy and an ending. "Come," Hayes murmured. "Let's get you home." He led her away from the scene, past the murmuring onlookers, to where their horses waited. With tender care, he helped her mount, then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest as they rode slowly back to the boarding house. Martha was waiting on the porch, having heard the commotion. One look at Willow's face told her everything she needed to know. Wordlessly, she helped them inside, bringing hot tea laced with brandy to the parlor where Hayes had settled Willow on the sofa. "Drink this," Martha urged, pressing the cup into Willow's trembling hands. "It will help with the shock." Willow sipped obediently, the liquor burning a path down her throat to pool warm in her stomach. "I never wanted him dead," she whispered. "I just wanted to be free of him." "You are free of him," Hayes said, kneeling before her. "And his death is not your responsibility. He made his choices right to the end." She nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I know, it's just, he wasn't always the man he became. Once he was kind, gentle even." She looked up at Hayes, needing him to understand. "I loved him once, before the whiskey ate away everything good in him." "Of course you did," Hayes said, taking her hand. "That's who you are, Willow. You see the good in people, even when they've lost sight of it themselves." Martha discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the quiet parlor. As the shock began to subside, Willow found herself leaning into Hayes's strength, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I'm sorry our picnic was ruined," she said eventually, attempting a small smile. "There will be other picnics," he assured her. "What matters is that you're safe." She studied his face, seeing the concern etched in every line. "You were going to tell me something, before Jimmy came, about the future." Hayes hesitated, then shook his head. "It can wait." "Today has been difficult enough. Please," she insisted. "I need something good to hold onto tonight." He searched her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Taking both her hands in his, he spoke softly. "Willow, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching you rebuild your life with such courage and grace, I find myself thinking about a future with you in it, a shared future." Despite the day's trauma, Willow felt a flutter of joy in her chest. "I think about that too," she admitted. "You do?" Hope brightened his eyes. "Yes, every day." Hayes brought her hands to his lips, kissing them tenderly. "Then perhaps, when you've had time to process today's events, we might talk more about what that future could look like." "I'd like that very much," Willow whispered, realizing that even in the aftermath of violence and death, life continued to offer new beginnings. Hayes stayed until she was calm enough to sleep, then reluctantly took his leave, promising to return in the morning. As Martha helped her prepare for bed, Willow felt a curious mixture of grief and relief, sorrow and hope. "It's a strange thing," she confided to Martha as they sat brushing out her hair. "I mourned Hank long before today mourned the man he was, or the man I thought he could be. Yet seeing him die still hurts." "Of course it does," Martha replied gently. "You're not the kind of person who can witness suffering without feeling compassion, even for someone who caused you pain." Hayes said something similar. Martha smiled knowingly. "My brother understands you better than you might realize." She set down the brush. "Now try to rest. Tomorrow is a new day." As promised, Hayes returned early the next morning, concern evident in his features until he saw Willow come down the stairs, pale but composed. "How are you feeling?" he asked, taking her hands. "Better," she replied truthfully. "Sad but at peace, I think." They walked together to the small graveyard on the hill overlooking Eldorado Canyon. Hank's burial had been hasty but dignified, with the preacher saying a few words despite the circumstances of his death. Standing before the fresh mound of earth, Willow said her own silent goodbye to the man she had once loved, the man who had been consumed by his demons long before Sheriff Miller's bullet ended his life. As autumn deepened toward winter, Willow found herself healing from wounds both old and new. The town's attitude toward her warmed considerably after Hank's death. No longer was she viewed with suspicion or pity, but with respect for her resilience and admiration for her dignified handling of tragedy. The boarding house thrived under her management, with Martha increasingly turning over responsibilities to Willow as her competence became evident. They made an excellent team, Martha's warmth and cooking skills complementing Willow's organizational abilities and head for business. Hayes continued to court her with patient devotion, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They rode together on his ranch, attended church socials, and spent quiet evenings by the fire at the boarding house, building a foundation of friendship and trust that grew stronger with each passing day. As the first snows of winter dusted the canyon rim, Hayes invited Willow to accompany him on an errand to his ranch. The day was clear and cold, the landscape transformed by a delicate coating of white that glittered in the sunshine. "I need to check on a mare that's due to foal soon," he explained as they rode, "and there's something at the ranch I'd like to show you." When they arrived, Hayes tended to the pregnant mare while Willow prepared coffee in his kitchen, moving comfortably in a space that had become familiar over the past months. After ensuring the horse was comfortable, Hayes returned to the house, stomping snow from his boots on the porch. "Everything all right with the mare?" Willow asked, handing him a steaming cup. "Fine for now. Probably another week before she delivers." He took a sip of coffee, watching her over the rim with an intensity that made her blush. "Willow, would you come with me? There's something I want you to see." Curious, she followed him through the house to a door she had never seen opened. Hayes withdrew a key from his pocket, unlocking it to reveal a staircase leading up to what must be an attic space. "Mind your step," he cautioned, taking her hand as they ascended. The attic was surprisingly bright, with dormer windows letting in streams of winter sunlight. Unlike the functional simplicity of the rest of the house, this room was filled with color and comfort, a hand-woven rug on the floor, shelves of books lining one wall, a comfortable chair beside a small table. Most striking was an easel near one of the windows with a half-finished landscape painting resting on it. "Hayes," Willow breathed, taking in the unexpected sight. "Did you paint this?" He nodded, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. "It's just a hobby. Something my mother taught me." Willow moved closer to examine the canvas, amazed by the skill evident in the brush strokes. The painting depicted the view from his ranch in autumn, the aspens in their golden glory against the rugged canyon walls. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Why have you never mentioned this talent?" Hayes shrugged, suddenly boyish in his embarrassment. "Not much call for artists in cattle country. Most men around here would consider it unmanly." "Well, most men around here are fools, then." Willow surveyed the rest of the room, noticing other paintings stacked carefully against the walls. "May I?" At his nod, she began examining them one by one, landscapes mostly, capturing the wild beauty of Nevada in different seasons and lights. Then she came across a portrait that made her pause. It was her own face, rendered with such sensitivity and care that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "When did you?" She began, unable to finish the question. "After Founder's Day," Hayes admitted. "I couldn't get your expression out of my mind, the way you looked watching the fireworks, so full of wonder and hope." Willow traced the outline of her painted face with a trembling finger. "This is how you see me." "Yes," he said simply. "Beautiful, strong, luminous." She turned to find him watching her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Setting the portrait carefully aside, she crossed the room to where he stood. "Hayes Remington," she said softly, "you are the most remarkable man I've ever known." Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, tentative but sweet. His arms came around her gently, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of all that might be. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willow Shepherd. I think I have since the moment I saw you on that auction block, so afraid yet still standing tall." "And I love you," she whispered back, the words coming easily, naturally. You who saw value in me when I'd forgotten my own worth. He drew back slightly, reaching into his pocket. I was going to wait until Christmas, but now seems right. He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Willow's breath caught in her throat. Hayes, are you certain? After everything, I've never been more certain of anything, he interrupted gently. You are not defined by your past, Willow. Neither of us is. We're defined by the choices we make now and the future we build together. He took her hand. Will you marry me? Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and clean as mountain spring water. Yes, she said, smiling through happy tears. Yes, I will marry you, Hayes Remington. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her hand to his lips, sealing their engagement with a kiss that felt like a blessing. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows, but inside the attic studio, wrapped in each other's arms, Willow and Hayes were warmed by the promise of love that would endure through all seasons. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Eldorado Canyon, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the holiday. Martha, beaming with joy, stood as Willow's witness, while Sheriff Miller stood up for Hayes. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the previous summer's scandal forgotten in the spirit of celebration. Willow wore a dress of deep blue velvet that Hayes had ordered from Carson City, with her mother's locket around her neck and the silver comb securing her veil. As she walked down the aisle to where Hayes waited, handsome in a new black suit, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror on an auction block to beloved bride in just 6 months, a transformation as profound as the changing seasons, yet as natural as the turning of the earth. The scars of her past would always be part of her, but they no longer defined her future. Judge Holloway, who had signed her divorce papers from Hank, now presided over her wedding to Hayes, a symmetry that seemed fitting. When Hayes slipped the gold band onto her finger beside the pearl engagement ring, his hands were steady and sure, his eyes filled with a love that made her heart overflow. I, Hayes, take you, Willow, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his deep voice carrying through the hushed church. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Willow spoke her vows in a clear, confident voice, leaving behind the fearful whisper that had once been her only defense. I, Willow, take you, Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Nevada, Judge Holloway proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Remington, you may kiss your bride. Hayes lifted her veil with gentle hands, his eyes holding hers in a look of such tenderness that Willow felt tears threatening again. Then his lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their vows and promised a lifetime of love. The celebration afterward at the boarding house was joyous and lively, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. Martha had outdone herself preparing a feast, and the town's ladies had contributed pies, cakes, and other delicacies. As midnight approached, Hayes found Willow beside the Christmas tree, watching the festivities with a contented smile. Mrs. Remington, he murmured, the name still new and wonderful to her ears. May I have this dance? They swayed together in a quiet corner as the fiddler played a waltz, lost in each other while their friends and neighbors celebrated around them. Happy? Hayes asked, his breath warm against her temple. Perfectly, she assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. And you? More than I ever imagined possible. He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. Are you ready to go home? Home. Their home. The ranch that would now be theirs together, where they would build a life, perhaps raise children someday. The thought filled Willow with a sense of rightness, of belonging. Yes, she said, smiling up at him. I'm ready. They said their goodbyes amid good-natured teasing and well wishes. Martha hugged Willow fiercely, whispering, "I always wanted a sister, now I have one." Outside, snow was falling gently, transforming the world into a glittering wonderland. Hayes had prepared a sleigh for the journey to the ranch, with thick blankets and hot bricks wrapped in flannel to keep them warm during the ride. As they glided through the silent, snow-covered landscape, Willow nestled against her husband's side, marveling at the stars that blazed in the clear patches of night sky between snow clouds. The same stars had watched over her during her darkest days and now witnessed her greatest joy. "What are you thinking?" Hayes asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was thinking about that day on the auction block," she replied honestly. "How terrified I was, how hopeless everything seemed." She turned to look at him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "And then you appeared like something from a dream and poured out that bottle of whiskey." Hayes caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Best money I ever spent. Why did you do that? Pour it out, I mean." He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a bend in the snow-covered road. "I wanted Sullivan to understand what he'd lost, that he'd traded something precious, your love, your trust, for something as fleeting as the whiskey pouring into the dirt." He glanced down at her. "And I suppose I wanted to make a promise to you, even then, that I wasn't buying you for myself, but setting you free." Willow's heart swelled with love for this man who had seen her value when she'd forgotten it herself. "And yet here I am, choosing to be yours." "As I am yours," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Always." The ranch house glowed with welcoming light as they approached, Hayes having sent one of his hands ahead to prepare for their arrival. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, warming the main room where a small Christmas tree stood decorated with paper stars and candles. "Welcome home, Mrs. Remington," Hayes said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Willow wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the strength in him, the tenderness. "Home," she repeated, the word holding new meaning, not just a place of shelter but a sanctuary of love. Later, as they lay entwined beneath thick quilts, the firelight casting a golden glow over their skin, Willow traced the contours of her husband's face with wondering fingers. "What is it?" he asked, catching her hand and kissing her fingertips. "I was just thinking," she replied, "how strange and wonderful life can be. 6 months ago I was a woman with no future, no hope. Now I'm here with you and everything is possible." Hayes gathered her closer, his arms a haven she never wanted to leave. "Everything is possible," he agreed. "And we have all the time in the world." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in pristine white, nature's own way of marking a clean slate, a new beginning. Inside, wrapped in each other's warmth, Hayes and Willow Remington began the first chapter of their life together, a life built not on ownership or obligation, but on freedom, respect, and love that had been freely chosen. Spring came early to Eldorado Canyon in 1868, bringing with it new growth and promise. At the Remington Ranch, the changes were evident in more than just the greening landscape. The house had been expanded with a new wing that included a proper studio for Hayes's painting and a library filled with books Willow had ordered from San Francisco. The corrals held a new crop of foals, offspring of Hayes's prize stallion, their gangly legs and playful antics bringing daily joy. Most significant, though, was the change in Willow herself. No longer the frightened woman who had stood on an auction block less than a year before, she moved through her days with confidence and purpose. As the wife of one of the territory's most respected ranchers, she had found her voice in the community, organizing a school fund, serving on the church committee, and even convincing the town council to establish a small lending library in a corner of the general store. Yet her greatest happiness came from the partnership she had built with Hayes, working beside him on the ranch, sharing ideas and dreams, falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Hayes encouraged her independence, delighting in her accomplishments and supporting her ambitions. "You've become quite the community leader," he remarked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls crimson and gold. Half the town jumps when Mrs. Remington makes a suggestion. Willow laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Hardly that. But it does feel good to make a difference. You've always made a difference, he said, kissing the top of her head. From the moment I met you, she looked up at him, her heart full. We make a difference together. As summer approached, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Willow discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with overwhelming joy and a sense of wonder at the new life they had created. "A baby," Hayes whispered in awe, his hand gentle on her still flat abdomen. "Our baby." "Due in January," Willow confirmed, her eyes shining. "A new year, a new Remington." They shared the news with Martha first, who burst into happy tears and immediately began planning baby clothes and nursery furnishings. The rest of Eldorado Canyon soon followed, showering the couple with congratulations and advice. As Willow's body changed with the growing life inside her, Hayes's protectiveness increased, though he was careful not to smother her independence. He insisted on hiring additional help at the ranch so she wouldn't overtax herself, and spent hours in the evenings reading aloud from medical journals and childcare books he'd ordered from Carson City. "You'll be a wonderful father," Willow told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her rounded belly where their child occasionally kicked and squirmed. "I hope so," he replied, a rare uncertainty in his voice. "My own father wasn't exactly present." Willow covered his hand with hers. "You are nothing like him. You're nothing like Hank either. You're Hayes Remington, the man who sees value in people, who builds rather than destroys. Our child is fortunate beyond measure to have you as a father." His answering kiss was tender, full of gratitude for her faith in him. "And even more fortunate to have you as a mother." The autumn of 1868 brought a bountiful harvest to the region and a sense of prosperity to Eldorado Canyon. Hayes's horse breeding business had expanded significantly, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase his stock. Willow, despite her advancing pregnancy, continued to manage the household accounts and correspond with buyers, her keen business sense complementing Hayes's knowledge of horses. As November arrived, bringing the first frosts and the promise of winter, they prepared the ranch for the cold months ahead. Hayes insisted on making the house as comfortable as possible for Willow, adding extra insulation to the walls and constructing a cradle for the baby from pine wood he'd cut and seasoned himself. "It's beautiful," Willow said, running her fingers over the smooth curves and delicate carving. "Did you learn woodworking from your father too?" Hayes shook his head. "From Caroline's husband, ironically enough. Before the drinking took him, he was a fine craftsman." His expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Caroline lately. About how she never got to experience this marriage to a good man, a child on the way, a future stretching bright ahead." Willow took his hand, understanding his mixture of joy and sorrow. "She's part of our story, Hayes. Without what happened to her, you might never have been in Eldorado Canyon that day, might never have seen me on that auction block." "True," he acknowledged, drawing her into his arms, careful of her rounded belly between them. "And I'll be grateful every day of my life that I was there." Their first Christmas as a married couple was a quiet celebration at the ranch, with Martha joining them for a festive dinner. They exchanged simple gifts: a new hat for Hayes from Willow, a gold bracelet for her from him, and practical items from Martha for the coming baby. As they sat before the fire that evening, Willow felt a profound contentment that went beyond happiness to something deeper and more abiding. From the ashes of her first marriage, a new life had emerged, not just the child growing within her, but her own rebirth as a woman of strength and purpose. "Happy anniversary," Hayes murmured, drawing her from her reverie. "1 year ago tonight, you became my wife. The best decision I ever made," she replied, smiling up at him. "Even better than the day I decided to trust a stranger who bought me at auction." He laughed, the sound warm in the firelit room. "We've come a long way from that day. And we have so far yet to go," she said, her hand resting on her belly where their future stirred. January brought heavy snows and bitter cold to Eldorado Canyon, but within the Remington ranch house, a different kind of anticipation built as Willow's time drew near. Hayes had arranged for the doctor from Carson City to stay nearby for the week of her expected confinement, along with Martha, who arrived laden with linens and baby clothes. The pains began on a clear, frigid morning, with the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white expanse. Willow had been expecting them, had been preparing herself mentally for weeks, but the reality of childbirth was still overwhelming. Hayes stayed by her side through the long hours, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when her strength faltered. When her fears threatened to overcome her, he reminded her of all she had already survived, all she had already conquered. "You're the strongest person I know, Willow Remington," he told her as the pains intensified. "You can do this. We're doing this together." Finally, as evening shadows lengthened across the snow, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room and their hearts. The doctor placed the swaddled infant in Willow's arms, his tiny face red and wrinkled, his fists waving in protest at the coldness of the world outside his mother's womb. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered, his voice choked with emotion as he gazed down at his wife and child. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold your son?" Willow asked, smiling through exhausted tears. With reverent hands, Hayes took the baby, cradling him against his broad chest. The tender care in his expression as he looked down at their child made Willow fall in love with him all over again. "Hello, William," Hayes said softly, using the name they had chosen if the baby was a boy, a tribute to Willow's father. "William Hayes Remington," Willow added, watching the two people she loved most in the world. A good, strong name for a good, strong boy. Martha, who had been helping the doctor clean up, came to peek at her new nephew. "He has the Remington eyes," she observed, noting the baby's deep blue gaze. "And his mother's determination, if that cry is anything to judge by." The first weeks of William's life passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious moments of discovery. Hayes proved to be a natural father, as willing to walk the floor with a fussy infant at midnight as to change a soiled diaper or sing improvised lullabies that made Willow smile even through her exhaustion. "I never knew it was possible to love like this," he confessed one night as they stood together watching their son sleep in his cradle. "It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "I know exactly what you mean," Willow replied. "It's like my heart is now outside my body, completely vulnerable." As winter gave way to spring, William grew and thrived, his personality emerging day by day, curious, stubborn, quick to smile. The ranch grew too, with Hayes's breeding program producing another exceptional crop of foals and his reputation bringing more business than ever. By the summer of 1869, they had expanded their operations to include a small dairy herd, with Willow overseeing the production of butter and cheese that sold well in the growing towns throughout the territory. What had begun as Hayes's modest horse ranch was evolving into a diversified and profitable enterprise. "I've been thinking," Hayes said one evening as they sat on their porch, William sleeping peacefully in Willow's arms, "about building a proper school for Eldorado Canyon." Willow looked up with interest. The town's certainly growing enough to need one. "More than that," Hayes continued, warming to his subject. "The children need more than the basics they're getting now. Art, music, literature, the things that feed the soul as well as the mind." "Like your mother taught you," Willow observed. "Exactly." He reached over to stroke William's downy head. "I want our son to grow up knowing there's more to life than just survival. I want him to appreciate beauty, to create it." "So do I," Willow agreed. "And I think you're just the man to make it happen." The Eldorado Canyon School opened its doors the following spring, built on land donated by the Remingtons and funded by contributions from the town's growing middle class. Hayes served on the school board, insisting on hiring qualified teachers from the East who could provide the kind of education he envisioned. As William grew from infant to toddler, the bond between father and son deepened. Hayes delighted in teaching his boy about horses, carrying him on his shoulders around the ranch, showing him the wonders of nature with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything he loved. Willow watched them together with a full heart, seeing in their relationship the healing of old wounds, Hayes providing the attentive fathering he himself had never received, breaking the cycle of absence and neglect. Their family expanded again in the autumn of 1871 with the birth of their daughter, Caroline Martha Remington, named for Hayes's sisters, one lost, one still beloved. Caroline was fair where William was dark, calm where he was energetic, but with the same curious intelligence that marked both Remington children. "She has your smile," Hayes told Willow as they watched their daughter sleeping in her cradle, "and your strength." "She has your artist's eye," Willow replied. "Have you seen how she watches the light move across the ceiling? She's studying it, just like you study a landscape before painting it." Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth, of challenges met and overcome together. The Remington Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Hayes's reputation as a horseman spread beyond Nevada, bringing buyers from as far as New York and even Europe. Willow continued to manage the business side of their enterprise with shrewd intelligence, expanding into new markets and investments. Together, they built something greater than either could have created alone, a partnership of equals, founded on respect and deepened by love. The children thrived in the atmosphere of security and encouragement their parents created. William, with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's determination, showed an early aptitude for both horsemanship and mathematics. Caroline, thoughtful and observant, revealed a talent for music and her father's gift for art. As the years passed, Eldorado Canyon grew from a rough mining settlement into a proper town, with the Remingtons at the center of many civic improvements. Hayes served terms on the town council, while Willow organized the first Territorial Women's Suffrage Association chapter, advocating for women's right to vote. "Some of the men in town think you're turning their wives against them," Hayes teased one evening after a particularly heated town meeting where Willow had spoken eloquently about women's rights. "If their marriages can't withstand their wives having opinions, those marriages weren't very strong to begin with," she replied tartly. Hayes laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Have I told you lately how much I adore your fierce spirit?" "Not since this morning," she said, smiling up at him. "I might need a reminder." In 1879, as William prepared to leave for school in San Francisco, the first Remington to attend university, Willow found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. Standing on the platform of the newly built railroad station, watching her tall, handsome son bid farewell to his sister and father, she felt the familiar weight of Hayes's arm around her shoulders. "He'll be fine," Hayes murmured, correctly interpreting her anxiety. "We've raised him well." "I know," she replied, blinking back tears. "It's just hard to believe so much time has passed. It seems like only yesterday you were cutting me free from that auction block." Hayes turned her to face him, his eyes still as blue and direct as they had been that day 12 years before. Lines of experience framed them now, and silver threaded his dark hair, but to Willow he was more handsome than ever. "Best day of my life," he said softly. "The day I found you." William's train departed in a cloud of steam and a chorus of farewells, carrying their son toward his future. As they watched it disappear around a bend, Caroline slipped her small hand into her father's. "Papa," she said thoughtfully, "tell me again about how you and Mama met." Hayes exchanged a glance with Willow, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. Then, taking his daughter's hand and offering his other arm to his wife, He began the story they had told their children in carefully edited form as they grew old enough to understand. Well, Caroline, it was a summer day in 1867, and your mother was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. As Hayes's deep voice recounted their beginning, Willow walked beside him toward their waiting carriage, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had seen her value when she'd forgotten it herself. The man who had poured out a bottle of whiskey in the dust of Eldorado Canyon and, in doing so, offered her not possession but partnership, not ownership but freedom, the freedom to choose love, to build a life, to become more than she had ever dreamed possible, the freedom that had led her home.